The summit of Mount Olympus was more than just rock and ice. Across the globe, from Greece to Tibet, ancient peoples envisioned their most powerful gods living on high peaks. Why did mountains become the universal home for immortal beings? This video uncovers the 26 fascinating reasons why these formidable landscapes were transformed into divine abodes. You will gain a complete understanding of how geography, psychology, and spirituality converge to place the eternal in the clouds. We will explore why a storm-wreathed peak felt like the throne of a god, and how the very air at high altitudes seemed to breathe with permanence. What does our instinct to place gods on mountains reveal about our own search for meaning? This concept of the mountain as a cosmic pillar appears everywhere. It is known as the axis mundi, the world axis, a sacred center that connects the heavens, the earth, and the world below. Think of the great world tree Yggdrasil in Norse tales, its roots and branches holding the realms together, or the timeless landscapes of the Aboriginal Dreamtime, where every rock and river is part of a living, sacred geography. The mountain is the ultimate physical form of this idea. It is a literal ladder between worlds, a perfect home for beings who exist beyond our mortal limitations. Its sheer verticality offers a tangible pathway, a place where prayers could rise and divine power could descend. In a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable, the mountain stood as an unshakable center. The renowned scholar of religion Mircea Eliade explored this deeply, noting how these sacred peaks created order from chaos. They established a fixed point, a central axis around which the entire cosmos could find its meaning and structure. The summit becomes this pivotal point of creation, a place where time itself seems to stand still. In such a realm, immortality is not a strange exception. It is the fundamental nature of things. Consider Mount Meru in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. It is not merely a mountain, it is considered the very navel of the universe. It is the central pole around which all stars and planets revolve, and it is the home of the Devas, the radiant immortal beings. This is not just one culture's unique story, it is a universal archetype. Why would ancient peoples anchor their entire understanding of reality to such a formidable and often inaccessible place? The answer may lie in the raw, intimidating power these landscapes naturally project. That storm-wreathed peak was not just visually imposing, it was a fortress of rock and ice. For an ancient person gazing upward, the mountain was a realm of inherent danger. The air grew thin and difficult to breathe, the temperatures plunged to a bitter cold, and the terrain was a treacherous climb of loose stone and sheer cliffs. This was not a place for human life, and that was precisely the point. The mountain's brutal inaccessibility created a perfect, natural barrier. It separated the bustling, mundane world of the villages below from a sacred and exclusive domain high above. Such a formidable home was not fit for mortals. It was a residence worthy of only the most powerful, eternal beings. The immense physical effort and very real peril of the ascent mirrored the spiritual journey one would need to even approach the divine. It was a test that effectively filtered out the casual and the unworthy, preserving the absolute sanctity of the summit. Myths from across the world are filled with heroes, like the Greek Prometheus who ascended to steal fire, or shamans from Siberian traditions who undertook these perilous climbs as a form of sacred initiation. Their quest was not just for a view, but for wisdom, for a direct audience with powers that resided beyond the human sphere. By placing their gods in a home so difficult to reach, ancient cultures reinforced a fundamental idea. These immortal beings lived in a state of purity, utterly undisturbed by the messy complications of mortal affairs. Their otherness, their eternal nature, was magnified by the sheer challenge of the journey to their doorstep. How does creating a home that is difficult to reach reinforce the power of its inhabitants? It transforms their dwelling into a symbol of their absolute separation, a place where mystery is protected by the very landscape itself. This deliberate separation by difficulty ensured that the mountaintop remained a pristine realm, a concept of divine purity that we will see echoed even more profoundly when we consider the mountain's role as a source of life itself. That very separation created a sanctuary of absolute purity. High above the crowded valleys, the mountain summit existed in a world apart, a realm of crisp, thin air and brilliant light, seemingly untouched by the dust, illness, and moral complexities that defined human life below. This physical distance translated directly into a profound spiritual ideal. The mountain became the ultimate symbol of an unsullied realm, a place of eternal order and perfection where immortal beings could exist without being tainted by mortal decay or human failings. Even in Greek myths, where the gods were famously flawed and prone to very human emotions, their home on Olympus was consistently depicted as a place of divine radiance, feasting on ambrosia, and removed from the ordinary suffering of the world they governed. This was not a contradiction, but a testament to the power of the mountain itself to represent an ideal state, a perfection that its inhabitants sometimes aspired to, even if they did not always achieve it. This concept of the mountain as a pristine sanctuary appears across the globe. In Chinese tradition, the Xian, or immortals, were said to dwell on the pure white peaks of Kunlun and Pinglai, far from the corruption of the earthly realm. For indigenous Andean cultures, the untouched, glaciated summits were apus, living mountain spirits of immense power and sacred purity. The environment itself was the message. The perpetual snowfields, the clear, star-filled skies, and the enduring, unyielding rock all suggested a state of permanence and incorruptibility, qualities absolutely essential for beings who had defied death itself. What does this deep-seated association reveal about our ancestors? It suggests that they envisioned perfection not just as a moral state, but as a physical place, a world literally above and beyond their own, forever unchanging. This perception of the mountain as an eternal, static monument is the next piece of the puzzle, a quality that made it feel like a permanent home for the timeless. A mountain's foundation is carved from deep time. While human empires rise from dust and fade into memory, these colossal stone forms persist, seemingly untouched by the centuries. This profound sense of permanence made them the ultimate symbolic residence for beings who themselves existed outside the flow of time. A forest can be consumed by fire, a river can change its course, but the summit of a peak remains, an everlasting throne for the eternal. Philosophers and poets across cultures have instinctively turned to the mountain as a metaphor for all that is enduring and unchanging. This symbolism is woven directly into the fabric of myth. In Japan, for example, the kami, the sacred spirits of the land, are intimately associated with ancient, venerable mountains like Mount Fuji. These peaks are not just homes, they are the very embodiment of an enduring presence that has watched over the islands for countless generations. The substance of the mountain itself, the unyielding stone, communicates solidity and a direct connection to the primordial past. How does anchoring a deity to such an eternal landscape reinforce their own immortality? It provides a tangible, visible proof of their timeless nature. A god who lives on a mountain that has stood for millions of years is not a fleeting idea, but a force as fundamental and permanent as the rock beneath one's feet. This powerful representation of stability, however, stands in perfect contrast to the dynamic and often volatile forces that play out upon its heights. That profound sense of permanence stands in perfect contrast to the dynamic celestial theater unfolding just above the summit. High on a mountain peak, the sky is no longer a distant ceiling, it is an immediate, enveloping presence. The air itself feels different, thinner and clearer, pulling the heavens startlingly close. On a crisp, cloudless night, the stars are not just points of light. They are brilliant, almost tangible jewels scattered across a velvet dome, seeming close enough to touch. The moon casts shadows with a stark, silver clarity, bathing the rocky landscape in an otherworldly glow that feels entirely separate from the world below. This literal, sensory experience of proximity to the sky led cultures worldwide to a logical and powerful conclusion. The mountaintop was the closest physical point to the heavens, the natural domain for sky gods, sun deities, and celestial immortals. For a culture that worshipped the sun as a life-giving force or saw thunder as the voice of a god, the peak was the ultimate vantage point, a divine watchtower and a place of direct connection. The summit of Mount Sinai, where traditions hold that Moses received divine law, perfectly embodies this idea of the mountain as a meeting point, a place where the veil between the earthly and the heavenly grows thin. In the mythologies of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, gods did not remain entirely aloof. They descended from or resided upon mountains to interact with the world, using these high places as their terrestrial bases of operation. Why would the sky, so vast and fundamentally unreachable, feel more accessible from a mountain peak? The answer lies in the raw, human experience of standing there, feeling the wind as a direct breath of the heavens and seeing the celestial bodies not as remote abstractions, but as active participants in the landscape. This bridging function, turning the mountain into a conduit for divine power, naturally leads us to consider its role as a place of ultimate oversight, a platform from which the immortal gaze could survey all of creation. That panoramic view from the summit is more than just a breathtaking sight, it is the ultimate seat of power. From this commanding height, a deity could survey their entire domain, watching over human cities, the changing seasons, and the flow of rivers. This natural vantage point transformed the mountain into a divine throne, a symbol of omnipotent authority and all-seeing wisdom. A god like Zeus, seated upon Olympus, was not removed from the world but strategically elevated, a constant and formidable presence overseeing the cosmic order and human fate. This idea resonates across traditions where the mountain-dwelling deity becomes the ultimate witness. They see the oaths sworn in valleys, the conflicts on distant plains, and the silent prayers offered in humble homes. This perpetual observation reinforces their role as the final judge and unwavering ruler. The mountain itself, with its unshakable foundation, becomes the very emblem of stable, sovereign power, the platform from which divine will is executed across the world below. How does the simple ability to see everything from a high place translate into such a powerful metaphor for control? It suggests that true authority is rooted in knowledge, in the capacity to understand the interconnected whole. This theme of powerful observation, however, is intrinsically linked to the dramatic and often fearsome atmospheric forces that play out upon those very heights. That panoramic view from the summit is more than just a breathtaking sight, it is the ultimate seat of power. From this commanding height, a deity could survey their entire domain, watching over human cities, the changing seasons, and the flow of rivers. This natural vantage point transformed the mountain into a divine throne, a symbol of omnipotent authority and all-seeing wisdom. A god like Zeus, seated upon Olympus, was not removed from the world but strategically elevated, a constant and formidable presence overseeing the cosmic order and human fate. This idea resonates across traditions where the mountain-dwelling deity becomes the ultimate witness. They see the oaths sworn in valleys, the conflicts on distant plains, and the silent prayers offered in humble homes. This perpetual observation reinforces their role as the final judge and unwavering ruler. The mountain itself, with its unshakable foundation, becomes the very emblem of stable, sovereign power, the platform from which divine will is executed across the world below. How does the simple ability to see everything from a high place translate into such a powerful metaphor for control? It suggests that true authority is rooted in knowledge, in the capacity to understand the interconnected whole. This theme of powerful observation, however, is intrinsically linked to the dramatic and often fearsome atmospheric forces that play out upon those very heights. Those same peaks that offered a commanding view also became a spectacular stage for nature's raw power. A violent thunderstorm encircling a summit is an experience that transcends simple weather. For an ancient observer, the lightning striking the rocks was not a random electrical discharge. It was the visible weapon of a sky god. The thunder was not just noise, it was the booming voice of a deity in a moment of passion or anger. The mountain transformed into a living theater where immortal beings actively displayed their presence and power. These dramatic atmospheric events made the abstract concept of a god's will suddenly tangible and terrifyingly immediate. The Norse god Thor did not just cause storms, he was the storm, his chariot's rumble echoing from the mountain passes as he hurled his hammer. In Hindu tradition, the king of the gods, Indra, wielded the Vajra, a thunderbolt that shattered demons and brought life-giving rains. The mountain was the natural platform for such displays, the place where the veil between the natural and the supernatural was at its thinnest. What does it mean when a culture interprets lightning as a conscious act? It personifies the entire world, turning unpredictable natural forces into the understandable emotions and actions of eternal beings. This interpretation was even more potent for volcanic mountains, where the earth itself seemed to breathe fire. The eruption of a volcano was not a geologic event. It was the visible, explosive wrath of a peak-dwelling god, or the roaring activity of a divine forge deep within the earth. This direct association between environmental violence and divine activity made the mountain a place of both profound terror and deep reverence, a site where the raw power of nature was understood as the direct work of immortal hands. This perception of the mountain as a source of immense dynamic power leads us to a quieter, more nurturing role, its function as the origin of the very substances that sustain life. From that divine forge of celestial power flowed the very substance of life. A mountain's slopes are the source of every great river, each one beginning as a trickle of snowmelt from a high glacier, gathering strength as it carves its way down to the valleys and plains. For ancient civilizations living in arid lands, this was not a matter of simple geography. It was a miracle of continuous generosity. The mountain was a life-giving parent, a primordial provider whose bounty sustained entire empires. This role cemented its status as a place governed by benevolent immortals who controlled the most essential resource of all. A deity who could command the springs and rivers from their high throne held the ultimate power, the power to grant life itself. How does controlling the source of water define a being's eternal authority? It makes them not just a remote ruler, but a direct sustainer of all that exists below. This concept of the mountain as a divine provider extended beyond physical water to mystical substances that granted their own form of life. On Greek Olympus, the gods consumed ambrosia and nectar, the very foods of immortality that kept them eternally youthful and vibrant. In the vast traditions of Hinduism, the sacred ritual drink soma, which conferred illumination and vitality, was said to have its origins in the mountains, brought down to humanity. And high on the misty peaks of China, alchemists tirelessly sought the elusive elixir of life, believing the mountain itself held the key to transcending mortal limits. The mountain was thus a fountain of both physical sustenance and profound spiritual gifts. This created a fascinating duality in its nature. the same formidable, inaccessible fortress that protected the god's otherness was also a generous, life-giving source. This complex layer reveals that mountain-dwelling immortals were not merely distant watchers. They were active participants in the cycle of existence, holding the power to nourish, to enlighten, and to grant a form of permanence to the world they oversaw. This role as a bountiful source, however, is intrinsically linked to its function as a defining boundary, a natural wall that protects the precious world within. That same life-giving source also formed an impassable wall. A mighty mountain range does more than just feed rivers. It carves the world into distinct territories, creating a natural border that separates kingdoms and defines the very edges of the known world. This geographical reality translated directly into a powerful mythological role, the mountain as a divine fortress and protective barrier. Even for all-powerful immortal beings, the mountain provided a strategic stronghold, a defensible citadel that shielded them from external threats like chaotic monsters or rival divine factions. In the epic tales of Norse mythology, the gods did not simply reside in Asgard, they fortified it. They built a massive protective wall around their realm, a celestial fortress set against the constant threat of the giants, with the great world tree Yggdrasil acting as its central axis and connective pillar, a concept many scholars interpret as a form of cosmic mountain. This was not a peaceful paradise but a defended citadel, its security intrinsically linked to its elevated, separated nature. Beyond the gods' own homes, mountains were often envisioned as the colossal walls at the very edge of creation. In various traditions, these immense ranges were believed to hold back the primordial forces of darkness and chaos, or to contain ancient evils from a bygone age, guarded eternally by vigilant, immortal sentinels. Why would a supposedly omnipotent deity require the protection of mere rock and stone? This reveals a profound layer in the mythological mind. The mountain's sheer mass and impenetrability were not just physical traits, they were symbols of ultimate stability and security. The divine order itself, the balance of the cosmos, needed a bulwark, a place of absolute safety from which the immortal rulers could maintain harmony without the constant threat of invasion or disruption. This concept of the mountain as a defensive structure transforms the summit into more than a solitary throne. It becomes an exclusive, elevated community, a divine acropolis where the eternal could live in guarded splendor, separated not only from humanity but from the very chaos that sought to unravel their perfect world. These divine societies were not born yesterday. They were imagined as ancient lineages, with the mountain itself serving as a living archive of their primordial origins. Before the gods of Olympus established their glittering court, the earth itself gave birth to older, wilder beings, and these ancient forces were often intimately tied to the deep, rocky bones of the world. The mountain was not just a home for the current ruling class of immortals, it was a direct link to the very beginning of time, a place where the echoes of creation still resonated. This connection to the primordial past made the peak a sacred repository of ancestral memory. What does it mean for a culture to root its gods in such an ancient landscape? It grounds their authority in a history that predates humanity itself, lending their rule an unshakable legitimacy. In the myths of many cultures, the first beings to emerge at the dawn of the world were the chthonic deities, the spirits of the earth, who arose from mountains, caves, and deep clefts in the rock. The Titans of Greek myth, the predecessors to the Olympians, were often associated with specific mountains, their power drawn from the raw, untamed earth. This was not a forgotten past, but a living one. The mountain-dwelling gods of a current pantheon were frequently seen as the direct descendants or successors of these primeval forces, their orderly society built upon a foundation of immense ancient power. This idea transforms the mountain into more than a residence. It becomes a throne room that has been occupied since the first moments of existence. The peak does not merely host the immortals, it validates their eternal right to rule, connecting their present-day councils and feasts directly back to the moment the world was formed. This profound link to the ancestral leads us to a more solitary, introspective dimension of the mountain, its role as a sanctuary for divine wisdom. That profound link to the ancestral leads us to a more solitary, introspective dimension of the mountain. But these peaks were not only thrones for ruling gods, they were also sacred resting places for the revered dead. Across countless traditions, a hillside burial mound or a tomb carved into a high cliff was not merely a memorial, it was a deliberate act of connection. By laying their loved ones to rest on elevated ground, ancient peoples were physically placing them closer to the sky, to the spirits, and to a realm beyond the mundane. This practice transformed the mountain into a vast, natural necropolis, a dwelling place for deified ancestors and the primordial beings who existed at the dawn of time. These peaks became living repositories of ancient wisdom, a direct link to the very origins of a people. How does housing the ancestors on a mountain bridge the gap between a mortal lineage and the eternal? It turns the landscape into a family tree written in stone, where every generation is physically connected to the first ones who came before. For many Native American traditions, specific mountains are not just landmarks, they are the abodes of ancestral spirits who actively watch over the tribe, their presence as enduring as the rock itself. In Chinese tradition, legendary sage kings and cultural heroes were often believed to have not died but transformed, achieving immortality and taking up residence on the sacred peaks of Kunlun or Tai Shan. These heroes, through their legendary deeds, transcended their mortal end and became eternal residents of the high places. This connection made the mountain a timeless anchor, a place where the present could constantly commune with the origins of life and culture. The peak was not a remote, silent monument, but a vibrant spiritual community where the voices of the founders and the wisdom of the ancients were always just a prayer away. This deep reverence for the ancestral naturally turned the mountain into the most powerful place for a conversation with the divine. The steep path to a mountain altar was more than a journey, it was a sacred act. From the high places of the ancient Canaanites to the summit sanctuaries of the Incas, cultures worldwide practiced high place sacrifice, operating on a profound conviction that elevation brought one closer to the ears of the gods. The arduous climb itself was a form of devotion, a physical offering of effort that purified the supplicant before they even presented their gift. Reaching the summit, a place of thin air and sweeping vistas, was to step onto a divine doorstep. An offering made in that rarefied atmosphere amidst the clouds was believed to travel a much shorter distance to its intended recipients. This created a powerful feedback loop that cemented the mountain's divine status. The myth stated the gods lived on the peaks, so people built their altars there. The presence of those altars and the intense spiritual experiences that happened there then reinforced the belief that the gods were truly present. Why would elevation be so intrinsically linked to the efficacy of a prayer? The environment itself provided part of the answer. The sensory deprivation of the climb, the dizziness from the thin air, the overwhelming scenery, and the profound isolation could all induce altered states of consciousness in the priests and shamans who performed these rites. In such a state, the veil between worlds felt thin, facilitating powerful visions and what were interpreted as direct messages from the immortal beings. This ritualistic use of the landscape solidifies the mountain's role as a designated portal, a place meticulously engineered by human practice for direct interaction with the divine. This concept of the mountain as a conduit naturally extends to the solitary individuals who sought not just to send a message, but to receive a transformative vision. The steep path to the altar was only the beginning, for a far more profound journey awaited the solitary seeker. The mountain ascent itself became a sacred blueprint for the soul's progress, a physical ordeal designed to strip away the mundane and force a confrontation with the deepest parts of the self. This was not a pilgrimage for the many, but a vision quest for the few, where the hero or mystic climbed not to conquer the peak, but to be conquered by the truths it guarded. The immortal beings dwelling at the summit were not merely distant rulers in this context. They were the ultimate guardians of sacred knowledge, the gatekeepers who would only bestow their spiritual gifts upon those who had proven themselves worthy through the harrowing ordeal of the climb. The physical struggle against the thin air, the treacherous footing, and the biting cold was a direct mirror of the internal struggle for spiritual attainment. Every labored breath was a letting go of earthly attachment, every moment of vertigo a confrontation with one's own limitations and fears. How does the arduous journey up a mountain reflect the path to enlightenment? It demands everything you have, forcing a death of the old self so that a new, wiser being can be born at the summit. The story of Moses on Mount Sinai is a powerful archetype, where a prolonged stay on the holy mountain culminated in a direct encounter that transformed him and his people. Similarly, while the Buddha achieved his awakening under the Bodhi tree, this tree itself is a classic symbol of the axis mundi, a vertical connector between worlds, functioning in the narrative much like a mountain. And in the timeless tradition of circumambulating Mount Kailash, pilgrims do not seek to conquer the peak, but to align themselves with its sacred geometry through the physical act of walking, a moving meditation that brings them into harmony with the eternal. In each of these stories, the mountain is the catalyst for a profound transformation, a place where the mortal, through immense effort and surrender, can briefly touch the timeless. This transformative potential, this promise of rebirth through trial, is what naturally drew those who sought the ultimate discipline away from the world, leading to the establishment of secluded sanctuaries high upon the slopes. That hermit's cave, carved by wind and time into a mountainside, represents a profound human impulse, the deliberate pursuit of solitude. For ascetics, mystics, and sages across the world, the mountain's extreme isolation was not a hardship to be endured, but a sacred tool to be wielded. It provided the ultimate environment for stripping away every distraction of society, every comfort of the body, to focus entirely on the life of the spirit. By withdrawing from the bustling world below, these seekers aim to transcend their mortal limitations through intense meditation, rigorous austerity, and direct communion with the divine. Their very presence on the slopes over years and centuries slowly transformed the mountain's reputation. It became more than a home for ready-made gods. It was a nursery for potential divinity, a training ground where a human being, through immense effort, could aspire to join the ranks of the eternal. Historical figures like Milarepa in Tibet, who was said to have meditated for years in mountain caves clad only in a single cotton cloth, became living legends. Their stories, passed down through generations, often blurred the line between a highly advanced human and an immortal being. In a different tradition, the Christian stylites of the Middle East took this vertical yearning to its literal extreme, living for decades atop tall pillars, which functioned as symbolic, human-made mountains separating them from earthly attachments. Why does solitude, coupled with physical hardship, seem to act as such a powerful catalyst for spiritual advancement in the human psyche? The answer may lie in the forced confrontation with the self. In the utter silence of the high peaks, with no society to reflect back an identity, the seeker is left alone with the raw essence of their own consciousness. The constant discomfort of the cold and the struggle for basic sustenance become a relentless meditation, burning away the non-essential. This tradition suggests that immortality was not always seen as a distant gift from the gods, but as a state of being that could be earned through a supreme, solitary effort. The mountain, therefore, was not just a dwelling place for the eternal, it was a forge where the mortal spirit could be hammered into something timeless. This profound human endeavor to understand the mountain's spiritual secrets is mirrored by an equally powerful drive to unravel its physical mysteries, the geological puzzles that captivated early observers and shaped their mythic explanations. Deep within the mountain, the mystery only deepens. Beyond the sunlit peaks lay a hidden world of shadow and stone, a labyrinth of caves and echoing chasms that sparked the imagination as powerfully as the summit touched the sky. For ancient peoples, the mountain was not a solid mass, it was a vessel. Its interior was envisioned as a hollow realm, a subterranean kingdom teeming with its own unique order of immortal life. In the deep places of the world, cultures imagined dwarf smiths like the Norse Deified, master craftsmen forging magical artifacts in fire-lit caverns, or chthonic spirits guarding immense mineral wealth and ancient secrets. These were not the celestial gods of the peak, but earth deities, beings of profound primal power rooted in the soil and rock itself. How does the human mind respond to a landscape it cannot fully map? It populates the darkness with conscious life, turning geological puzzles into a living, breathing mythology. This interpretation was dramatically reinforced by volcanic activity. The fiery breath of an active volcano was not merely a natural phenomenon, it was the visible proof of a subterranean forge. In Greek myth, the god Hephaestus was said to have his workshop beneath a volcano, where the rhythmic hammering of his divine labor was heard as earthquakes and his furnaces blazed forth as eruptions. The mountain, therefore, was not a single home for one type of immortal, but a multi-layered abode, hosting celestial beings on its peak and chthonic powers in its fiery heart. Even the sudden, terrifying shifts of the earth itself, a landslide or a tremor, were understood as the restless movements of these immense subterranean entities, a constant reminder that the ground beneath one's feet was alive with conscious, eternal force. This perception of the mountain as a natural monument, etched with both beauty and mystery, leads us to consider its role as a timeless landmark that guided not just travelers, but the very identity of the cultures that grew in its shadow. A lone peak dominates the horizon, its shape a constant in the lives of everyone below. This mountain becomes more than a landmark, it becomes the very soul of a people, a geological anchor for their collective identity. When every story, every journey, and every prayer is oriented around this singular feature, the mountain naturally absorbs the culture's deepest values, transforming into a living symbol of their shared existence. It provides a fixed point in a changing world, a permanent home not just for gods, but for a community's entire sense of belonging. How does a shared natural monument foster a collective sense of the sacred? It creates a common spiritual geography, a map that every member of the culture carries in their heart. The mountain's enduring presence offers a profound psychological comfort, a promise that some things are permanent, that the homeland is real and tangible, guarded by eternal forces. This is vividly embodied by Mount Fuji in Japan, a national symbol so potent it has inspired art, poetry, and pilgrimage for over 1,000 years. It is not merely a volcano, it is a sacred being, a source of artistic and spiritual inspiration that unifies the nation. Similarly, for the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, Uluru is not a rock, it is a living narrative. Every crevice and color shift is part of the dream time, the epic story of ancestral beings whose journeys formed the world. The mountain itself is a primordial ancestor, a petrified testament to the creation events that bind the people to the land. By placing their immortal protectors and creator ancestors upon this central feature, a culture does something remarkable. It binds its people together under a shared celestial protectorate. The mountain becomes the ultimate communal altar, a place where individual faith merges into collective worship, reinforcing social bonds and a common destiny. This powerful sense of a shared, sacred center, rooted in the immense physicality of the mountain, inevitably triggers a deeper, more primal response within the human psyche, a feeling of awe that borders on the sublime. That feeling of profound insignificance at the base of a peak is a universal human experience. Modern psychology gives this powerful emotion a name: awe, a state of wonder triggered by encountering something vast that transcends our ordinary understanding of the world. This direct psychological response is a critical piece of the puzzle, explaining why the human mind so instinctively populated these heights with divine residents. The sheer scale of the mountain, the dizzying height, and the raw, untamed force on display did not just inspire stories. They generated a tangible, internal sensation that was interpreted as the palpable presence of a greater power. People did not merely believe the gods were on the mountain because tradition said so. They felt a visceral certainty of it every time they gazed upward and were struck by that humbling mix of terror and wonder. This emotional cocktail is what philosophers and artists have long called the sublime, the powerful appeal of something that is both beautiful and terrifying, that attracts and repels in equal measure. This sublime quality perfectly mirrored the ambivalent nature of so many immortal beings. A god like Zeus or Shiva could be a benevolent provider of laws and order, yet also a wrathful bringer of storms and destruction. The mountain itself embodied this duality, its sunlit slopes offering life-giving water while its storm-wreathed summit unleashed deadly lightning. The landscape was a perfect reflection of the god's complex character. Why does an awe-inspiring vista so naturally pull our thoughts toward the eternal? The overwhelming scale of the mountain makes the existence of a conscious force even more immense and powerful seem not just logical, but necessary to the human psyche trying to make sense of such grandeur. This deep-seated psychological reflex, this need to personify overwhelming power, is a fundamental building block of the mythic imagination. It is a thread we can trace through countless traditions, revealing how a shared human emotion forged a shared divine geography. 17 distinct cultures, separated by vast oceans and millennia, all arrived at the same breathtaking conclusion. The sacred mountain is a universal archetype, a profound idea that emerged independently across the globe. From the Incas' Apus in the Andes to the Greeks' Mount Olympus, from Japan's venerated Fuji to the Hindus' holy Kailash, the pattern is undeniable and stunning in its consistency. This is not a case of one culture borrowing an idea from another. It is something far deeper, a shared instinct written into the human experience itself. Comparative mythologists like the renowned Joseph Campbell spent their lives mapping these universal patterns, revealing how the mountain functions again and again as the world navel, the axis mundi, and the divine residence. The specific names of the gods change, the local myths vary in their details, but the mountain's core symbolic role as a home for the eternal remains unshakable. What does this global resonance tell us? It points to a fundamental wiring in our species, a collective response to the overwhelming presence of a peak. When faced with such a formidable and awe-inspiring part of the natural world, the human psyche, regardless of culture or era, seems compelled to populate it with conscious, powerful life. The reasons we have explored, from the quest for purity to the need for a stable center, are not merely Greek or Incan ideas, they are human responses. Recognizing this archetype allows us to see each culture's sacred peak not as an isolated belief, but as a unique and beautiful adaptation of a shared human understanding. This universal language of stone and sky speaks to a common yearning for connection with something greater than ourselves, a yearning that found its most natural home on the heights. The shaman's journey was not a myth, but a map of the spirit world written in the contours of the land. In traditions stretching from the Siberian steppes to the heart of the Americas, these spiritual specialists undertook a sacred ascent, climbing a cosmic mountain or tree to reach the upper world. Their destination was not a physical summit, but a metaphysical one, a realm where powerful helping spirits and ancestral guides resided. This shamanic cosmology did not just describe a belief, it described a geography of the soul, with specific, tangible peaks in the physical world serving as portals to this immortal domain. The shaman's ability to traverse this landscape and return with wisdom or healing made the mythical mountain a lived, experiential truth for the entire community. How do altered states of consciousness shape and reinforce geographical myths? They transform abstract belief into personal revelation. The shaman, through techniques of drumming, chanting, fasting, or prolonged isolation, would enter a profound trance state. In this altered consciousness, the journey to the sacred peak felt utterly real, a direct encounter with the eternal beings who dwelled there. This was not a story passed down, it was a report from the front lines of the spirit world, a first-hand testimony that gave the myths an unshakable foundation. The community did not have to simply trust an ancient tale, they could witness the shaman's transformative return, the new knowledge or healing power they brought back serving as tangible proof of their voyage. This direct, ecstatic contact solidified the mountain's role as an active center of immortal activity, a place where the veil was not just thin, but could be consciously crossed by those who knew the way. This tradition of seeking direct revelation on high places, of climbing not just for a view but for a vision, is a thread that connects the shaman's ecstatic journey to the prophetic voices that would later echo from other mountaintops. A message delivered from a mountain peak carries an authority that resonates through millennia. This archetype of the prophet ascending to receive divine law is one of the most enduring motifs in human history. We see it with Moses on Sinai receiving the foundational commandments that would shape a civilization. We find it in the early life of the prophet Muhammad, who sought solitude in the caves of Mount Hira, where the first revelations of the Quran were bestowed. And in the ancient traditions of Zoroastrianism, the prophet Zarathustra is said to have received his revelation on a mountain, communing with the divine wisdom of Ahura Mazda. The mountain's environment was not a mere backdrop for these events, it was an essential component. The profound isolation stripped away the noise of communal life, creating a mental and spiritual vacuum. In that silence, the seeker's mind could become a clear vessel, perfectly attuned to receive a communication believed to be unmediated and pure. Why would a message from a mountaintop be perceived as possessing ultimate truth? Its origin in a realm set apart from human society endowed it with an objectivity that transcended the biases and fallibilities of the valley below. This established the mountain as the ultimate source of foundational law, a place where the eternal rules for mortal conduct were handed down directly from an immortal being to a chosen intermediary. This connection to hidden knowledge was further cemented by the establishment of oracles on mountainsides. The most famous of these, the Oracle of Delphi, was situated on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. Here, the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, would deliver her prophecies, her words considered a direct conduit to the god's will. The very location was chosen because it was a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the future and the divine plan could be perceived with startling clarity. The revelations received in these high places were not seen as personal opinions or interpretations. They were considered absolute, their authority derived from their source in a transcendent realm of perfect order. This profound link between the mountain and ultimate truth naturally extends its role back to the very beginning of things, to the moment of creation itself, where the first order was spoken into the chaos. The very first thing to exist was a mountain rising from the endless sea. In the creation stories of countless cultures, the world begins not with a bang, but with an ascent, the emergence of a single, solid peak from the formless, chaotic waters. This was the primordial mound, the first and most fundamental home. It provided the initial stable ground from which the first gods, the primordials, could begin their work of shaping the cosmos. This cosmogonic role forever sanctified the mountain, making it the ultimate source of all order and life. In the ancient Sumerian tradition, the universe itself was born from the sacred union of the mountain, known as Ker, and the heavens, An. The earth and sky were not separate realms, but were originally part of this single, towering mass. Similarly, across the vast expanse of Polynesia, creation myths tell of the gods fishing the islands up from the deep ocean. These islands were not just land, they were the peaks of a great submerged mountain, the first solid ground pulled into the light. How does being the site of creation automatically confer a sacred and immortal status? Because that location becomes the anchor of all reality, the point from which time itself began to flow. The beings who stood upon that first summit were present at the genesis of everything. They did not simply move into a pre-existing home, they called the very substance of their home into being. This foundational act ties their existence irrevocably to the mountain. It is not merely their residence, it is their co-creator, the physical manifestation of their primordial power. This establishes the peak as a timeless witness, a silent participant that observed the dawn of existence and has held the memory of that first moment within its stone ever since. This profound connection to the absolute beginning naturally leads us to see the mountain not just as a place, but as a character in its own right, a personified entity with its own will and voice. The mountain was not merely a divine residence, it was a divine person. In the worldview of many ancient cultures, the peak itself was a conscious, immortal being, a living entity whose stone and snow formed its eternal body. This profound animistic perspective dissolved the distinction between the dwelling place and the dweller, the god and the ground it stood upon. The mountain did not host a spirit, it was the spirit, a sentient force of nature personified. This is vividly embodied by the Andean Apu, a mountain spirit that is not separate from the physical peak but is the mountain itself, a powerful protector and progenitor of the local people. Similarly, the Greek Titan Atlas, condemned to hold up the celestial spheres, became so fused with his burden that the entire range in North Africa bears his name, the mountain and the immortal being becoming one and the same. What shifts in our perception when a landscape is no longer an object, but a subject with its own will and character? The mountain's rumbling landslides were not random events, but expressions of its mood. Its life-giving springs were a conscious gift, and its violent storms a display of its formidable power. This personification created the most intimate possible relationship with the eternal, where the community lived directly in the presence and under the gaze of a being as vast and ancient as the land itself. This deep connection, seeing the mountain as a living ancestor, naturally guided how people observed the cycles that played out across its sacred form. The summit's stone silhouette cut a perfect line against the pre-dawn sky, a natural instrument for measuring the heavens. Ancient priest astronomers did not need complex machinery, they had the mountain itself. They watched as the sun and moon, year after year, would rise or set in precise alignment with a specific peak, a sacred notch, or a solitary rock spire. This transformed the entire landscape into a colossal, immovable calendar, a cosmic clock face with the mountain as its central pillar. The predictable, eternal rhythm of these celestial events, observed from such a stable and elevated platform, powerfully reinforced the belief that this was a place of divine order, governed by immortal beings who maintained the very rhythm of the universe. How does the ability to predict celestial events from a mountain link that place to divine intelligence? It suggests that the gods residing there were not just powerful, but were the ultimate masters of time and the seasons themselves. A culture that could accurately mark the solstices and equinoxes from a high peak held a profound advantage, knowing precisely when to plant and when to harvest. This knowledge was not seen as a human discovery, but as a sacred revelation granted by the mountain-dwelling deities. The stunning Incan citadel of Machu Picchu is a masterclass in this principle, with its structures meticulously aligned to capture the sun's rays during key solar events. The Intihuatana stone, the so-called hitching post of the sun, was an instrument of both astronomy and worship, a place to literally tie the sun god to his course across the sky. The gods who presided over such places were thus the architects of cosmic law, their immortality mirrored by the unerring, cyclical nature of the stars they commanded. This profound connection to a perfect, orderly cosmos is nostalgically echoed in the widespread myths of a lost golden age, a time of perfect harmony that was believed to have originated from these same sacred heights. That nostalgic longing for a perfect beginning finds its home on a high peak. We often envision a lost golden age, a time of harmony and abundance, as a paradise located on a mountain. Think of the divine feasts on Mount Olympus, a realm of perfect weather and eternal celebration, far removed from the hardships of the world below. This was not just a home for gods, it was a preserved fragment of a flawless creation, a time when immortal beings walked freely among a more innocent humanity. The mountain became a living relic of that primordial perfection, a place where the original conditions of the world remained untouched by time, decay, or conflict. The eternal residents were therefore more than just powerful rulers. They were the guardians of a lost utopia, living in a state of existence that we can only remember in our deepest myths. Why do we instinctively place our visions of a perfect world on high ground? It transforms the mountain into a symbol of hope, a tangible reminder on the horizon that a more divine state of being once existed and, in a way, still persists. This powerful association made the peak a beacon, drawing people not just in spirit but in body, turning the landscape into the ultimate destination for a journey of renewal. That collective yearning for a return to paradise is what forged the mountain's role as a focal point for pilgrimage, where entire communities could walk together toward the memory of a more perfect time. The footprints of countless pilgrims have worn a visible path into the stone. This is not a trail made by solitary seekers, but a groove carved by communal faith, a physical testament to the enduring human need to journey toward the divine. When thousands of people circle Mount Kailash in Tibet or ascend Croagh Patrick in Ireland, they are doing more than just taking a walk. They are participating in a living ritual that actively reaffirms the mountain's sacred identity with every single step. The pilgrimage itself is a powerful collective declaration. By undertaking the physical hardship of the journey, the entire community acknowledges, in the most tangible way possible, that this peak is the authentic dwelling place of immortal beings. Their shared effort becomes a form of mass devotion, a deliberate attempt to bridge the vast gap between the human and the eternal through sheer, concerted will. How does a physical journey to a sacred site strengthen the belief in its divine inhabitants? It transforms abstract faith into a visceral, shared memory. The aching muscles, the thin air, the collective focus on the summit ahead, all these sensations fuse into a single, powerful experience that is felt not just individually, but as a group. This shared hardship forges a profound collective identity, directly linking the community to the immortal residents they seek to honor. These rituals, often timed to celestial events like solstices or specific holy days, create a rhythmic tradition that pulses through the years. With each new generation that makes the climb, the mountain's sacred significance is not just remembered, it is actively recharged and renewed. The peak ceases to be a distant, mythical idea and becomes a lived, experiential reality for the entire culture, its power refreshed by every pilgrim's footstep and every shared prayer. This enduring engagement demonstrates a power that has evolved over millennia but has never truly faded. The first climber stood on a summit once reserved for gods, breathing thin air and seeing only stone. This moment of geographical discovery, repeated on peaks from Olympus to Ararat, presented a profound challenge to ancient belief. Yet the myths did not simply crumble, they transformed. The literal throne of Zeus was empty, but the mountain's deeper meaning remained, shifting from a physical address for deities to a powerful metaphor for the human spirit's own ascent. The immortal beings did not vanish, they migrated inward, becoming archetypes residing in the collective human psyche. The mountain was no longer where the gods lived, but where humanity could feel most profoundly the longing for them. This evolution reveals a fascinating resilience in our symbolic language. How do these ancient stories survive the collapse of their literal foundations? They adapt, finding new life as internal guides rather than external facts. The physical conquest of the peak did not disenchant the world so much as it re-enchanted the human mind. The mountain's role as a spiritual touchstone endured precisely because its power was never solely about the beings who lived there, but about the human need to reach for something beyond ourselves. The summit, now scientifically mapped and physically accessible, became a symbol not of a god's home, but of our own eternal quest for meaning, a journey that continues long after the last rock is climbed. The Lonely Mountain in Tolkien's epic is not just a setting, it is a character, brooding with ancient memory and hoarding a dragon's treasure. Our modern stories are still built upon the same primordial foundations as the oldest myths. J.R.R. Tolkien, a scholar of ancient languages and legends, deliberately wove the archetype of the sacred mountain into the very fabric of Middle-earth. The Misty Mountains are a perilous, mist-shrouded barrier, home to ancient evils and lost kingdoms, while the Lonely Mountain, Erebor, is a literal dwarven stronghold, a fortress of stone that guards not just gold but the heart of a culture. This is not merely a fantasy trope, it is the Axis Mundi reborn for a contemporary audience. The mountain continues to symbolize a place of immense challenge, hidden wisdom, and the dwelling of beings who operate on a timescale far beyond our own, whether they are elves like those in Rivendell, nestled in the foothills, or the dwarves delved deep into the rock. Even in the technologically dazzling world of the Marvel Universe, Asgard is not a distant planet in the conventional sense. It is a celestial citadel, a floating mountain range of gleaming spires that embodies the same ideals of divine order, ancestral power, and defended perfection that ancient Greeks attributed to Olympus. Why does this symbolic language feel so instantly familiar and resonant to us today, even in an age of satellites and skyscrapers? Because the reasons are not historical, they are psychological. The mountain still triggers that same primal sense of awe, that humbling feeling of insignificance before something vast and enduring. Films like Avatar make this connection explicit, with the floating Hallelujah Mountains serving as a direct spiritual and physical home for the Na'vi, a sacred place utterly separate from the destructive industrial world below. These modern narratives prove that our need to project the eternal onto high places has not vanished. It has simply found new mediums. The mountain remains the ultimate symbol for anything that is ancient, powerful, and fundamentally other, a visual shorthand that our collective unconscious understands immediately. This persistent presence in our stories demonstrates that the 25 reasons we have explored are not isolated factors, but interconnected threads in a single, enduring human tapestry, weaving together our geography, our psychology, and our timeless search for meaning in the face of the immortal. So we arrive at a final, panoramic view of this ancient landscape of belief. From the Axis Mundi connecting cosmic realms to the natural thrones of divine authority, the reasons we have explored form a single, interlocking system. The mountain's intimidating inaccessibility created a sacred separation. Its geological permanence mirrored eternity itself, and its dramatic storms became a living theater for immortal power. These were not random choices, but a profound, collective human response. The feeling of awe, the rituals of pilgrimage, and the universal archetype of the sacred peak all converged, transforming formidable rock and ice into the ultimate dwelling for the eternal. These enduring myths were far more than simple fantasies. They were sophisticated attempts to map the human experience of the sublime directly onto the geography of our world, a way to find a tangible home for our deepest concepts of power, permanence, and transcendence. The next time your eyes rest upon a majestic mountain range, remember you are gazing at one of humanity's oldest and most powerful symbols. You are looking at a natural cathedral that once housed the gods, a place that continues to whisper of something greater and inspire a timeless sense of wonder. We would love to hear from you. Which mountain myth from your own culture or travels has most captivated your imagination? Share your story in the comments below.